Graduate of the MBA program and Vice President of the Alumni Association Board of Directors. I am pleased to welcome you to our second annual Conversations with the C-Suite panel discussion. Thank you to our panelists for taking the time today to share your industry experiences and discussing the evolving business landscape with us today. Before we start the discussion, please take a moment to silence your cell phones if you could. Tonight's panel is an interactive discussion, and we will welcome your participation. We will take questions from both our in-person audience and our virtual participants, with time for questions following each topic in our discussion. Our webinar guests may enter questions in the question and answer box, and we will relay them to our panelists, and a microphone will be available for our in-person guests. Without further ado, it is my privilege to introduce Western New England University's Chief of Staff and alumnus of our law school, Pamela Keough, who will moderate our discussion this evening. Kurt was appointed the role of Chief of Staff and Secretary of the Board of Trustees in August of 2021. Prior to his appointment, he served as interim provost and vice president of academic affairs. Kurt is a tenured professor of sport management in the College of Business, and he previously served as director of the Business Study Abroad program and director of the Business Honors program, as well as the director of the Center for International Sport Business. Prior to joining academia, he worked for the NCAA in its compliance and enforcement department, and subsequently for the United States Olympic Committee in successive positions as an associate general counsel, director of athletic services, and director of international relations. Thank you, Kurt, for participating this evening.
Well, good evening, everybody. Those of you who are in attendance here and tuning in from home, I want to acknowledge the sponsor of this evening's program, the Western New England University Alumni Association, that has invited the panelists here this evening, and specifically the president, who's not present this evening, but Rob, thank you for representing the Alumni Association. I'd also like to acknowledge the presence of the chair of the Board of Trustees of Western New England University. Mr. Ken Rickson is in the house tonight. Thank you, Ken. And with that, I'd like to welcome all of you tuning in from home. Thank you for joining the live stream. And your questions will be welcome this evening to be fielded by the panelists. But first, I'd like to introduce the panelists. And we'll start with Jim Bedard to my right. Jim is an executive vice president and CFO at the RVI Group, which is an insurance company based in Stamford, Connecticut. They provide insurance products, financial solutions, and analytical services. Previously, Jim spent 14 years at United Healthcare, a healthcare and well-being company, most recently as mergers and acquisitions lead, strategic partnerships, and predictive analytics for its employer and individual business division. In his volunteer work, Jim is a member of the WNE College of Business Advisory Board and the Greater Hartford Arts Council's Board of Directors, board treasurer at Achieve Hartford, a private sector collaborative dedicated to building a talent pipeline from among students in the Greater Hartford region, and board treasurer of the Hear Hartford chapter of the Hearing Loss Association of America. Let's welcome Jim Bedard. Thank you, Jim. Seated next to him is Pam Keough. Pam is president and CEO of the Make-A-Wish Foundation of Connecticut, an organization that seeks to provide every child in Connecticut with life-threatening illnesses the wish of their dreams. Previously, Pam was Chief Operating Officer at Make-A-Wish, and prior to that, served in senior management positions at Selective Insurance Corporation of America and General Re Corporation, the multinational property casualty and life health reinsurance company that is a subsidiary of Berkshire Hathaway. Pam started her career as an internal auditor and then senior information technologist for Pfizer Consumer Healthcare. I read that once upon a time, Pam's grandmother advised her to go into this thing called computers, which I guess prompted her to return to Western New England for her MBA in Management Information Systems. And the rest, as they say, is history. as she leveraged her skills and knowledge to where she is today. Welcome, Pam. Seated next to Pam is Diane Holman. Diane is Chief People Officer at Virgin Pulse, a digital-first health and well-being company that is part of the Sir Richard Branson's Virgin Group. Previously, Diane was Managing Director and Global Head of Talent Management for Moody's, parent of Moody's Investor Services and Moody's Analytics. And prior to that, she was Senior Vice President and Chief People Officer at Athena Health. Diane has also held leadership positions in senior management at Capgemini, an information technology services company based in Paris, and Dutch information services company Wolters Kluwer, as well as at Raytheon, General Electric, and Mass Mutual. In 2022, Diane was elected Vice Chair of the Western New England University Board of Trustees. Welcome, Diane. Next, we have Andy Krol. Andy is Executive Vice President of Card and Board Games at Cartamundi, a manufacturer and producer of board games, card games, collectible card games, packages, and playing cards. He previously served as the company's CFO for North America. Prior to joining Cartamundi, Andy was Director of Finance and Operations and Tools Business Segment at Newell Rubbermaid, and the Operations Controller, as well as the Marketing Controller at Lennox, a division of Newell Rubbermaid. Andy began his career as the Director of Financial Planning for Global Operations at Hasbro, the multinational conglomerate toy company. Andy is a member of the boards for East of the River Five-Town Chamber of Commerce and the Bristol Fish and Game Club. Welcome back, Andy. And finally, we have Eric Kuchova. Eric is partner, CFO, and member of the investment committee at Q-Ball Capital, a venture capital firm in Boston, where he oversees Q-Ball's finance and operations functions, including portfolio company valuations, fund administration, investor relations, financial and performance reporting, and regulatory compliance. Prior to joining Q-Ball, Eric was a finance manager in the private equity group at Bain Capital, where he focused on fund operations, financial reporting, and investment valuation. Eric began his career working with alternative investment managers in the assurance practice at PricewaterhouseCoopers. Eric is a certified public accountant and a member of the Western New England Accounting Advisory Council in the College of Business. Welcome back, Eric. All right, now that everyone has been properly introduced, I think I'd like to invite the panel to give some brief opening remarks about coming back to campus after I don't know how many years. Some of you might have been back more frequently than others, but for some of you, that's not the case. So maybe you can share a little bit about this homecoming opportunity and make any other remarks you would like to our audience in Wood Auditorium and listening at home. And in Di Holman's case, I'd like her to touch on her current title and position as Chief People Officer, because you know there's a plethora of new fangled C-suite titles and positions. I just read there's something called a Chief Happiness Officer someplace, a Chief Customer Officer, a Chief Future of Work Officer. So Diane, would you give your brief remarks? Maybe you can give us some insight into your position title as Chief People Officer.
Great. So I think I'm known as the Chief Unhappiness Officer currently. No, there's actually, having spent 30-something years in HR, it's really HR. I have oversight for all of the compensation, like the typical HR responsibilities, right? Compensation, diversity and inclusion, internal communication. And how I see my role, because I know that there's a broad continuum of chief people officers. For some companies, I kind of joke, it's the person who plans the summer picnic, right? Or the facilities, or, you know, everybody has a big title, but truly in our organization, it's a very valued role by our CEO and our CFO. And why is that? Because it's a very business-oriented role. My role is really about, as we think about the business strategy and where we're trying to head with Virgin Pulse, and it's a growth strategy. I think like many companies, it's critical. It's about, you know, everything from the culture of the people, how to reward people. Where do we have some challenges? I know we're going to speak about a little bit about hybrid work this evening and inclusion, and it's all of that. So it becomes a very complex role. And especially during COVID, it actually took on even more significance because you had added responsibilities around just even, you know, kind of what I would consider kind of Maslow's hierarchy, right? Making sure that people are safe and healthy. So that became an added component to my role. But it's really about taking the business to where we need to be and making sure that we have the right talent and the right roles with the skills and capabilities in order to grow and achieve our revenue targets as well as our EBITDA targets. So it's just in a nutshell. I'm happy to entertain any other questions if there are any.
Thank you. Let's have the introductions and opening brief remarks from others.
I'll just talk about coming back to campus. Even though I'm local, I was born and raised in Springfield. It's been quite a while since I've been back on campus. I think I came to watch a hoop game maybe 3-4 years ago, and back when I was a little lighter, I would take advantage of the gym and the facilities. But certainly coming back here at night speaks to me because I was on the 10-year plan. I did the night school while I started my career, and I appreciate the bio that said I started right up at a pretty lofty level, but I really didn't. I was on the factory floor at the old Mill Bradley company, and was able to come here and go to school nights and get my degree. So certainly coming back at night is a good feeling for me. But extremely impressed with what I see every time I drive by here. Every building, every new building that goes up, every announcement about a different discipline or a different school coming in. Just very excited and very proud to be an alum of this institution.
Thank you. Anybody?
Yeah, sure. So I was here maybe 5 years ago, something like that, and before that, maybe 10 years before that. And you know, I initially, when I heard that we were becoming a university, I wasn't really quite sure what that would mean. I think when I think back to what was Winnick, I mean, to me, the essence was like a really small school. You know, had such a great experience. It was very collegial and it was community oriented, and I'm actually surprised that it still feels that way, despite, you know, the facelift that we've seen. I think it's obviously certainly an upgrade. I was meeting with a mentee earlier today, and he was asking me, where did you eat? You know, without the comments, like, well, we ate right there. He's like, that's kind of small, isn't it? You know, and I hope he doesn't mind me saying that, but you know, the funny thing was it was small, but at the same time, it was, you know, one of those heartbeats of the campus. And I think as I look back on it, I was, you know, maybe a little bit mystified that things were going in the direction that they have. But I mean, I still feel like it's the same school that we went to.
I guess I'll make a couple comments. I tend to get back here a fair amount, so maybe at least once a year or so. And so I love seeing all the advancement, all the new buildings. But I also like seeing some of the things that have stayed the same. So it's great to see, you know, Plymouth is still there, which I had 2 years of living there. But what I also do is I've gotten a chance to do the real test with the management department every year and work with the students. And, you know, it's in the spring, it's getting close to graduation. And there's that, you get that same feeling. So the students are presenting. I'm sitting up in Herman Hall, and it could have been 30, 40 years ago. It felt the same. So I like the familiarity, but I also like a lot of the new advancements and some of the new buildings. But it's nice to have that, what feels like a really nice balance.
And I'm a little different. I haven't been here since 1995. So things have changed quite a bit. Although, as Jim said, some of the things have still stayed the same. But there's lots of people. When I was here, it was a big commuting school. So after 5 o'clock, it really emptied out. I noticed today there were still a lot of people around, a lot new buildings, much nicer than what we had back then, but still all the same. And I was saying, Jim, I remember coming in this hall for Sunday night church services, and I don't know if they still do that, but it's yeah, pretty much the same. So it's been a long time. Life happens, and you have your first kid, and then you just don't come back. And I'm glad I came back, and hopefully I'll be back more after this.
All right, thank you all for your opening remarks. Our audience, both live and via remote, they know this is styled as a conversation because it's titled Conversations with the C-Suite. So I know they're armed with some questions, but I thought I'd kick off the conversation by throwing out some broad questions. This is for anybody, nobody in particular. Let me start asking this question about the hybrid work environment. Since COVID, we as a university had to shift, adapt, and pivot. When we announced that we were going to shut down for 2 weeks just before spring break in March of 2020, we also at the same time made the decision we would come back fully online. Now, this is talking about pivoting on a dime because everybody, 98% of our students were taking classes on ground, in person, in the physical classroom. And we said, we're going to give you a 2-week break. You go home. We're going to extend your spring break. And we, on the university side, had to gear up to come back after two weeks to deliver the courses completely online. There were no in-person classes at that time. And talk about being tricky, difficult, ugly, but we did it. It wasn't pleasant, but we did it. And it got better week after week, month after month, and to the point where we are now, where the majority of classes are back in person, face-to-face on ground. But now we have a larger percentage of classes being delivered in a hybrid or fully remote medium because we're comfortable moving in that space, both the faculty and the students. So I'd like to hear from you and your respective organizations, how you have managed through the transition and where you are today in a remote or hybrid, or if you are back in the physical space. It's for anybody. How are you managing this?
Yes, I'll jump in. We were lucky that we were on the forefront, that everyone had technology. They had laptops. I know a lot of people got caught where they didn't have the technology and then they're trying to get technology for their staff to work at home. But for us, it's a little different being a nonprofit. A third of our revenue comes from events, and those events just disappeared overnight. So we had to figure out, how do we do, you've probably been to too many of these virtual events. So join the gala, donate money, and just watch it on TV. It went okay, but it wasn't what we wanted to go through. And then it's just, it was just tough for us. I think we got through it. Unfortunately, we had a few layoffs, so that was the downside of it. But we couldn't avoid it, and now we're back. We're back. Office first policy. And it's been a little bit tough for some of our especially moms who, they liked being at home. And I said, but you still have to bring your child to daycare. What does that matter? And they said, you know what? I can throw a little laundry in. I could get dinner started while I'm listening to a conference call. But again, when you're a group that's so collaborative, you kind of need to be together, or at least have an office first policy. That's what we have today.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit. I wasn't in the current role that I am in now at RVI. I was at United Health Group. So United Health Group had about 2,300 employees in Hartford, and that was the location I was the site lead for. So, I can talk specifically about that, and then broader for the company, because you had a company that has over 300,000 employees worldwide. Some who are clinicians, and then others who are in the service area. So, keep in mind, the university did. We pivoted to work at home because the model was there. And then you started to go with how do you start to bring people back safely. So we started to reconfigure the space for social distancing, rules around testing. As the pandemic evolved, rules around vaccinations and whether or not you'd even be allowed back in the building if you didn't show some form of vaccination. So managing through all of that was the biggest challenge. I would say that we probably ended up having, out of 2,300 employees, probably 200 who would show up for work every day. And the vast majority would still stay working from home. And even now, as you move into, trying to bring people back in the office, trying every technique possible, because now you had to give them a reason to come back in the office. It wasn't, hey, come back in and just do what you're doing at home. So trying, for instance, hey, come into the office, we'll go to the Yard Goats game, after work. Okay, that might've got a few in. We did some free lunches on Wednesdays to try to get people to come in. We did some ice cream Sunday socials. We even did at lunch to do kind of a movie, pick a movie, we'll sit around and watch a movie, but just to try to draw people back in. You'd get some that would come in, but for the most part, you're still looking at, an operation that's probably has 1/3 of the individuals coming in the office that it had before, but still not skipping a beat in terms of productivity and, and true, employee output. And a lot of people enjoy working from home. They've completely restructured their family lifestyle to work from home. So, I think now it's really just truly understanding what that environment looks like. It's very different. Look at in my house, I now have access to an attorney, somebody who works as a buyer, who is an expert in Excel that I have access to, and somebody who also knows how to do network configurations that can help with Zoom, Teams, Google Meet. So all of a sudden, my work environment is very different, and it's my family. I'm the barista, so I'm the one who runs the coffee machine for the coffee breaks. So you adapt, and it gives you new opportunities. It used to be bring your child to work day once a year, and now your child can be at work almost every day. And then, of course, we have the puppy that can run around and be the stress relief impromptu throughout the day as well. So.
I was just gonna say, I'll take a crack at this because we did a slightly different thing. Just to give you context, so I was part of Moody's in the epicenter in Manhattan. When I remember the day, it was like, I think everyone does, right? It was like all of a sudden, we actually had some people that had been traveling to India and Asia because we had a major office there. And all of a sudden it was like, everybody get home, get home. And even though I was riding subways and people were masking, no one really knew, remember, like what was going on here. So everybody, we went home, and remember those days, it was like, now instead of like productivity in the office, you were now 24/7. You were trying to do it seemed like, because everybody took advantage of, oh, well, everybody's just sitting at home anyway, so it would be okay to have 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night meetings. And then it was like, wait a minute, the boundaries here. So the reason I'm telling you kind of this is I think, what I'm seeing from the research is it's not going to change anytime soon. This is one of the most complex issues that companies, organizations, higher ed are facing every single day. Everyone's experiencing this. But I go from that to Virgin Pulse. And a little bit of context on Virgin Pulse, we're about 2,000 people globally. We have a large operation in Bosnia, which never left. So when you're dealing with a very global company, there's different responses to how they took it, how they looked at the pandemic. The other thing so what we really felt that we had to do is take a look at the data, because I think, right, it became a very emotional time for people. Are we at home? Are we not? Who's here? And we had like teenagers running, on Zoom calls, like with their, kind of like, saying like the exposure of your family life. You saw everything happening behind whoever you were on the Zoom call with. Whether it was the teenager coming out of the shower or the child jumping on the bed because they weren't in school. To a company though, where we have 52% of our employees are already remote. And how do you think, how do you take a look at that? So you had many of our people were fine with. We've been very productive. We're meeting the results. And what I saw, and I'm curious about the others on the panel, was there was actually what happened is there was a big divide between leadership and employees. Because even I know our CEO, when I first started, was like, that's it, get everybody back by January. We can't do this anymore. And what we did though is, and I'm glad we did this, was we engaged employees. And we said, you know, what are you looking for? What would be a right amount? And we had 87% of our people who said, I'm not coming back to work. You know, that's just the way it is. And what you do find in the research is there's a very disparate impact, especially with women, gender, and people of color. So it's a much more complex issue of bringing everybody back than I think we kind of, than we thought about it. So what we agreed to do was we went on a hybrid approach, which was where you feel your best. All we said is, let's look at the flexibility. And I will tell you, we're actually using it as a marketing tool for talent, because if you look at the research on talent, the number one thing is not necessarily career development anymore, or career growth, or total rewards, or all those things that we kind of had in our pocket as what people wanted. And the number one thing why people will leave companies or join companies is flexibility. So we've actually been able to use it as a way to attract talent where they feel that they can have flexibility to pick their children up. Now, I understand it's not for every company, but where our organization is that it's what really motivated people and kept us staying. We have two things though that we continue to see as challenges, right? One is cultural connections, right? When you're in a remote space, kind of unless you're every other day, you know, and trying to entice people back with the infamous snacks or lunch, you know, it's the cultural connections. And so what we've done is a lot of work on our remote employees, where we have culture champions in different regions, and we give them some money and they can kind of look to do some connections, and they own the pool of money where they can make some decisions that empowers them, but it also brings people together. We've also leveraged it from a financial, because we actually gave up a lot of our real estate, which was significant savings. So we didn't have to really cut as deep as we needed to with the employee base. And then the second thing that was a big challenge for us was communication and keeping people engaged. And so what we've decided, the leadership team, is we will have in-office things where it's like moments that matter, like a company kickoff followed by meet and greet with the leadership team and maybe some lunch and learn. So really focusing on those moments that matter to help people stay connected, but also feel that they have the flexibility to join, you know, to grow their career.
I'll just add a couple of things, because I think there's a lot of shared situations and reactions and how we handled it. In terms of some of the leadership versus how everybody else treats it, we had a little different divide in ours. We're 3,000 people globally. We've got 13 manufacturing facilities in 11 countries. When we came back to work, manufacturing came back to work. There was no hybrid for the employee on the assembly line, or running a printing press or an injection mold machine. So it became an us versus them, factory versus office as well, that we had to navigate. And still today, we are back to work 3 days a week in the office. But you know, the trend for me, the trend is coming the other way. You know, Diane mentioned the cultural divide, or building that culture and maintaining that culture, extremely difficult. And I think one of the things that it really pointed out to us was managers were not ready to manage in a remote environment. We didn't have that experience where a high percentage of our teams were already working remote. This was everybody out of the building where everybody used to be in the building. And it really emphasized or put a spotlight on the fact that leadership development, management development, how to manage these teams remotely was a skill that we didn't have. So kind of shining the light on that. The last thing I'll touch on, it's more personal than professional. I have a son who graduated from UMass maybe the year before COVID. So his first foray into the workforce was stunted by going remote right off the bat. So he's sitting in his apartment in Boston in a one bedroom or 4-bedroom apartment where he's living with 3 people he doesn't know, because that's all he could afford. And he wakes up and he goes into the shared kitchen and says, okay, I'll get my breakfast, and then goes into his bedroom. and works for 8 hours a day and then shuts his computer off and work 10 hours a day, whatever it is, because you're never off. And really nowhere to go. I mean, he's 20 of the 24 hours in his room of a day. So it was really difficult for him. He needed that office interaction. And he was at a company that same thing. Their lease ran out. And the company said, we're not ready. We're remote now. So it's a very difficult for new entrants into the workforce as well, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I have maybe a little bit of a different experience, mainly because the organization I work with is, sub 20 people, right? So we have rotating interns and maybe we balloon up to 25 at times, but we're kind of perfectly situated to be a remote first company. That's not, to be clear, what we are today. But it was relatively easy for us to collaborate immediately, right? I mean, we're doing work on deals and evaluating investments, and it's a little bit of an easier environment to kind of do on a remote basis, with one big caveat, right? So a lot of our work is relationship cultivation. So travel and meeting founders and building relationships becomes really difficult, obviously in a remote first environment. So we definitely felt that from an organizational standpoint. I think we pivoted pretty quickly, in terms of the employees. And as it exists today, I think we kind of have a model that understandably wouldn't work for the size of the organizations you all work with, but it's kind of, choose your own destiny, right? I mean, we have nobody in the office on Fridays. There's a team lunch on Thursdays that we typically all attend. But outside that, it's you kind of make, your determination based on the collaboration you need. And there's investor meetings and things that kind of make sense to do in person, but I think everybody has a little bit of a different take. We've kind of taken the onus that if we can't manage somebody based on their, location, then that's probably an indication that we're not great managers, not necessarily them not being great workers. And personally, I have two small daughters. The oldest of which was, maybe 15 months when this all went down and daycare shut. So remote for me was a huge benefit, being able to be there. And, you fast forward, now she's 4 years old and, I've been home basically every single day of her life that she can remember. And so the first time I went to Boston, it was like this huge ordeal, and so I think for me, I've changed the way I've looked at, remote work pretty drastically. I think personally, it's been a really solid experience. It's one I wouldn't trade, but at the same time, everybody has their own wants and needs. And so, you touched on it. We have, for your son, we have a few folks that are just graduated, college, whether they be interns or, new hires, and they were in small apartments in Boston and they were looking for respite of an office, right? Somewhere where they could go to connect, right? And so we actually hired somebody initially to be basically our chief fun officer, right? She ran all of our events. She made sure people were having fun. The kitchen was stocked. I mean, it's such a critical role that, I don't know that everybody appreciated it at first, but it made all the sense in the world when that role was vacated, right? You could really feel the difference. So I think that community building aspect is really important, but I think it also kind of gave people the opportunity to be a bit more responsible with their own life.
By the way, I'll just end the topic by saying, I don't know if anybody saw it, Zoom announced today they were laying off 15% of their workforce. So I don't know if that speaks to the trend a little bit too, right?
Yes.
Can I ask a question of whomever wants to address it? But with so much of the workforce having gone remote and or hybrid, have you changed the way that you evaluate your employees if they're fully remote or if they're mostly remote? And along the same vein, when you're hiring people, are you evaluating or asking them to show you how effectively they work remotely?
Yeah, I would say no on both questions. I think the evaluation is based on just performance in the job, regardless of where. And I think it's always been that way, whether it was remote or not. And, and think of it, I came out of environments where my staff wasn't right outside my office, that they were all over the country and there was offshore teams as well. So that was already ingrained, that there was a model to make sure that it was an equitable evaluation of performance, and there was no, extra credit because you sat right outside the office and people saw that you worked all day. And never really thought about having the dialogue around how you work in a remote environment in an interview process. It's probably just more around what is the requirement? Is it required to be in 1 day a week, 2 days a week, 3 days a week, which days? And whether or not that suits the individual. In the firm I'm in now, what we do is we'll just make sure the finance team is in on specific days, other units are in on other days. And if you want to be in on those days to meet with those other units, feel free to come in on those days as well. I think too, just the point around, you're going to see space get reconfigured very differently. So as everybody's given up real estate, even the real estate they're left with isn't in the right configuration to support a true hybrid environment. So you're going to see more of that hoteling kind of mindset where you check into a neighborhood, and that neighborhood may be the finance neighborhood, maybe the sales and marketing neighborhood, maybe the actuarial neighborhood. And that's where you'll work that day because that's who you want to be with, because that's the day you're solving the problems with those particular teams. But as far as the interview process, not so much around the mechanics of what you do, but really more just around the logistics of which days in, which days out, and what's mandatory and what is flexible.
If I can just add again, because I think different perspective, we don't have the experience of being remote. So this was the first experience. We're not intentionally evaluating people differently, but I'll tell you the opportunities, I think, go to the people that are in the office first because they're there. And if I need something, or if I notice my CFO or my VP of finance needs something, his default is to the person that's there, and and it's not the right. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying we advocate it. I'm not saying, it's the way we should be doing it, but it's just natural that the person who is there, who is raising their hand, who you see, is getting exposure, and it's on us to make sure that we're doing the right thing by the people that are remote, because we have the policy. We can't hold our policy against somebody, right? So I'll just point that out.
Yeah, Andy, I think that's a good point. Corporations or companies that have satellite offices, and the employees who work offsite in these satellite locations, they tend to be out of sight, out of mind. So when big decisions are being made, including advancement opportunities or appointment to senior level positions, they're not around, they're not in the home office. And I think there's an advantage to being closer to home, and not intentionally, but just as a practical matter, right? I think by default, that's what happens. So I appreciate your comment. Are there any questions from the audience or Brianna from the home viewers?
No one here questions just yet.
All right.
The numbers are going up.
Okay, in the house? Not yet? All right, so we'll continue the conversation here. And we'll just take a slight deviation from the COVID-induced hybrid environment and talk about businesses having to be nimble and agile and having to adapt to changing marketplace conditions and circumstances. Perhaps you can share some examples from your respective organizations or your experiences, including having had to pivot to make a course correction midstream. Has anybody experienced this? It could be COVID or non-COVID related, but the idea is that businesses have to adapt constantly because of marketplace demands.
I'll take a crack at this one because last year for us, regardless of actually COVID, what was happening, and Eric knows our space a little bit here, so I'll kind of maybe phone a friend here. But what we went through, what was typically happening in a lot of the tech companies is they were investing in people and products, just keep hiring. Like the year of 2021, 2021, we hired like almost 800 people. We're only an 1,800 person company now. So it was this kind of mindset, I think, in some tech firms, which I was not used to at all, coming from where I worked before. We just keep hiring. And so we had to pivot significantly in 2021. And I mean, it was very dramatic because it involved a new CEO, a new leadership team, which I'm part of, and then resetting the company, which we called Reimagine Virgin Pulse. In terms of, we were just too fat. We were not making our EBITDA. We were doing okay with some of the revenue, but as you know, I mean, well, our business, the people that we sell to are organizations that for their employee benefits. So if you're in an organization where you're like, okay, I don't know what's happening during COVID, and probably the last thing you're going to do is to want to invest in a digital platform on healthcare, right? You're making those tough decisions on, am I going to keep people or am I going to invest in Virgin Pulse? And so we wanted to take a proactive approach. And so last year at this time, and Ken probably knows too much of this because I probably displayed it in the board of trustees, but we actually had to reset the entire company. We had to reorganize it. We ended up having to let go probably about 400 people. And it was very dramatic. But in parallel, what we wanted to do though, we didn't want this to just be a cost takeout because it wasn't, right? It was more about resetting the company, where our customers were going. We needed to go more international. And we had grown so fast. We had 9 different acquisitions that we really didn't have any operational discipline in terms of taking the company from kind of elementary school, if you will, to becoming like a high school run company where you had defined processes and approaches. And so we had to make a dramatic shift last year. We brought in a lot of new talent. We let some talent go. But in parallel, what we also did is we sent the message that this is a different company. We're focused on becoming a $1 billion company. We got people engaged. We redid all of our values. We invested in our leaders. We put together a leadership structure. So while it was a difficult time over this past year, we reflect on the fact that I know a lot of tech companies are doing that now, but we reflect on the fact that we wanted to try to recession-proof the company. And when you're going through it, it's very difficult, but I think on the back end, we've become very strong in terms of our ability to really grow in the marketplace and take the company to $1 billion in the next couple of years. Probably where I underestimated, I think all of us did, is the amount of change management, right? Because anything like this, it's easy, not really, to let go people, but it's not easy to, in tandem, be reducing your costs and your expenses, but also trying to get people's mindset shifted towards a new strategy, a new vision, and what's in it for them. So it's just an example of basically a complete turnaround this past year.
Anyone else? Any questions from the house or online? Not yet?
In terms of employee benefits and trends you're seeing there, what are you seeing? I mean, I think things have shifted in that, some of them are offering free food in the house, right? I mean, it's not the same values that resonate with a lot of employees like it used to. Are you seeing anything shift in terms of, is it shifting more into compensation or is it more into other benefits? What are you saying? I guess anybody.
So here's the reality, right? You've heard of like the Great Resignation, right? All of a sudden there was COVID, and then all of a sudden there became this Great Resignation. Then it became the Great Regret. Then there was quiet hiring, quiet leaving, it's just run the gamut. I do think the danger that, when you look at some of what's being played out in the media is if you're running a company, an organization or something, you're just like constantly like, what is going on here? What does employees really want? And the way that, and probably like my colleagues up here, the way that we've determined what employees want is we've asked them. So for us, we know that we can't compete. We're run by private equity, by the way. We were run by Richard Branson. We do have a connection with him. We spent about $26 million on a license. And so there is an alignment there, but we run through private equity. And if you know private equity, which Eric does, it runs very lean. And so we can't pay the top dollar. So we can't compete. We know we can't compete against Google. And so that's where earlier what I was saying was we asked people, and what they wanted was just give me flexibility. Because you know what, like everybody was coming in saying like, oh, I can get 120% more, 50% more, and kind of holding companies captive. quite honestly, like, unless you pay me that, I'm going to leave. But the reality is, if someone's going to do that, they're probably going to leave anyway. This is my belief. I've been doing this for a long time. I know what my colleagues think. So we really tried to focus in on engage people, make them part of the discussion, the decision. And so that's where we did ask them. Flexibility became number one. We just did a whole engagement survey, and there were really three big things. One was this idea of burnout, right? So now all of a sudden, if everybody's not knowing where they're working, there's this element of burnout and mental health. So we invest a lot in that area for people. Leadership development, which I totally agree with. And in this one, part of this is really getting managers. I still believe people leave for their managers, and if they're not adequately trained on how to help people through this. So we've invested in the manager training. And then the third is these kind of cultural connections and trying to build a culture when we may all be in hybrid places. So that's how we're addressing it.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some companies where they've started to introduce student loan forgiveness components in, reintroducing 100% tuition reimbursement programs rather than you get so much per year for reimbursement. You see more emphasis on behavioral health and behavioral health type programs in the benefit structures. So more to really think about the total employee well-being. So you see a lot more introduction of financial tools as well as healthcare and mental health type of tools in the whole, either voluntary or benefits that are provided by the employer. And I think it's just a function of the labor market right now. You still have 11 million jobs out there that are open, and an unemployment rate that's still right where we were pre-pandemic at 3.5, 3.6, something like that.
The other thing we just launched was from a benefits perspective, actual benefits. And we look at it as total rewards versus just like health and like life insurance and 401k. But we just launched, there's a whole new, which is controversial, quite honestly, but we made a decision as a leadership team, we were going to do this, which was transgender operations, supporting that. It's brand new benefits, and also the travel benefits for people that have to go over state lines for abortion. We know that there's a risk there because I know in certain states there's lawsuits popping up, but the general counsel and I and the leadership team made a decision because we said, at least for our population, we're a very young population, early career, and those were important things. And those are things that we believe as a company are part of our values. And so that's what we did.
Yeah, we're a small organization, so I think I've kind of maybe two or three experiences. One direct, which is there's really no amount of monetary benefits you could offer an employee that doesn't want to be there or is unhappy. What we're seeing though is that you can give people some discretion. So we do simple things like reimbursement for gym memberships, very simple things that on the surface, it's not a ton of money, but it just shows that you're trying to reach out to them on a more personal level. I guess indirectly, we have a few investments in the, call it talent empowerment space. So we have a few platforms geared towards, developing women and minorities. So career path, coaching, things like that we've seen, them experience some tailwinds through this process, right? So I think it's investments in people, and I know that's a broad category in the context of benefits, but just getting to the essence of what people really want to do and helping them further themselves professionally and personally. I think those are kind of the things we're seeing.
I'm a little bit different because I'm a nonprofit. So I can't pay the people what they could go make in corporate. They could make a lot more. Nor would my donors want me to do all these sorts of programs and spend their money. They want them to go to the Wish kids. So it's a little bit tough. And we have an office first policy because we're collaborative and we're all working on wishes, and that's what we do. But as others said, we do have some flexibility. So sure, if someone needs to work from home, the plumber's coming, not a big deal. But also we do the Gallup survey every year. And what my team really likes is the recognition. So we are praising them every single day, every which way they can. And we're also giving them opportunities to meet with the Wish kids and families and seeing the direct impact they're making. So that's my retention rate is very, very high with the staff. And it's, little bit of a miracle because they're not making a ton of money, but that's how we do what we do to keep them, retain them.
I think the surveys is great. I says the one problem with surveys, and you ask your employees what they want, they might tell you, right? So then you have to follow up. That's the problem, right? And with a larger group, it's very hard to answer every single want and need. I think Eric, you hit it. There's little singles. It's all about singles. But you got to be consistent with them, and you have to keep throwing them out there and see what sticks. And you know, there's no one magic bullet for sure. But I like some of the things that you just talked about.
All right, other questions? Yes.
So we talked a lot about what the employees want from you, and in full disclosure, I'm the associate vice president of the Career Center, so you're also my focus group. But for entry-level talent that you're getting, is there one skill set that you're not seeing that you'd like to see in them? And in your more experienced workers, is there a skill set that you would like to see in them that you're not getting that we developed?
I'd like to see a new entrance into the workforce be able to have a conversation one-on-one, face-to-face, as opposed to firing off an email or an IM, or, you know, they have to engage. And again, the remote challenge sometimes comes into play there, but pick up the phone, have a call, do the Teams face-to-face, put your camera on. That's a big deal for me. Put your camera on. I want to see you. I don't care what you're wearing. I want to see you. I want to know that you're engaged. You know, I think they're more inquisitive than I was going into the workforce, so I like that. I think they're more prepared probably than I was in some of the more technical things, I think. But I think the social interactive skills are a challenge. And then I've already talked about on the existing employees. I think there's a leadership development that needs to happen. You know, this goes for any employee. There's you know, the ability to understand what you need as a worker, and what my style is, what your style is, and being able to meet in some sort of a middle ground as well, right? It's not the pound to fist management style anymore, right?
And you touched on something that I found pretty funny, because I was going to say something similar, which is like I'm finding a lot of the new hires and the younger, you know, folks that we're hiring way more prepared and driven perhaps than I was coming in. The downside is I think they lack maybe just a little bit of patience, right? And I think that that's perhaps, you know, they come in, they have it all figured out. I didn't have any of it figured out. And so, you know, what I would encourage people to do is it's fine to not know what you're going to do a year from now. It's fine to not know what project you're going to be on in 3 months. To some extent, let it come to you, because I think if you embrace the moment, and if you can kind of focus on the key learnings at that particular point in time, you're just going to compound on those skills. And at some point, you're going to figure out what you want to do. And I guarantee you, for most cases, it's going to be different than what you thought, you know, initially. So I think that's what I try to encourage people to kind of see. At the same time, I mean, I love that they're prepared, certainly more so than I am, and, you know, absolutely driven. And I don't know if that's a function, you know, of how transparent, you know, the workplace is and career opportunities. I mean, there's tons of information out there, but, you know, I would say patience, perhaps.
Yeah, I guess I would say, you know, I would agree. Most of the new hires that come in really well prepared, but they probably go deep in their, you know, their major. They don't go across very well. So, you know, getting somebody whose discipline is in accounting to understand some of the financial systems that accounting will run on, or some of the management information dashboard reporting tools. They're kind of like, no, that's IT, that's not accounting. And it's like, well, no, it's, you gotta plug and play with the whole value chain. So I think just that awareness would be nice coming in the door, that there's, you know, there's more. So a lot of times I'll look for the accountant or the finance major that's got, you know, a minor in computer science, or at least in the toolkit, there's some interest in that space so that they can blend those two disciplines together.
I would actually second that. That's what I was going to say. I think this like system integrated thinking is so important. Now, I don't know if it's necessarily tagged to the new people coming in the company, because I've seen this throughout my career, which is people kind of are very myopic in the work that they do. And so how do they kind of raise their head up and see that they're part of a bigger system and how everything connects together? We used to call it in more of the engineering companies that I work for, like systems integrated thinking, that you can't understand. I mean, to your point, that the finance can understand what IT, because there's so many silos, even in our small company. We did a culture survey last year, and what we found was we had all these acquisitions, but even regardless, there were so many little just silos and fiefdoms, and people did not understand how X plus B equals, A plus B times C or whatever equals Virgin Pulse. They would just focus on the one kind of work stream. And so I think that's really, really important coming into the organization. And I think kind of building on what Andy said too, like the accountability. I think there's, and I don't know if this is some of the challenges I've seen with social media. We were kind of chatting about this earlier, of where you can just like throw something out there, but you don't have to own what you said. So I think it's really good that people should share their point of view, but they should also own it. It shouldn't just be like this anonymous, like, just get to throw stuff at you and you have to like figure it out. It should be really about that accountability factor where, have a point of view, have a voice, but also make sure you own it and come with that accountability. But again, I actually find most people coming into the organization are very similar to when I was starting an organization. That's my view.
All right, good conversation. Pam, do you have something?
Oh, I was just gonna add one thing that I
Go
just
ahead.
hadn't heard yet from the group, and I see it in my daughter too, right? She's 25, and these new kids that we're hiring in, they want to be promoted like right away. Like they've been at the job a month, they're like, when is my promotion, or when's my next raise, and where the more experienced people that I have, the staff, they prove it, and then they want their recognition and reward. But so that's the only thing I've seen that it surprised me quite a bit, because I'm like, you just started and you're asking about your next promotion, but you're not shy either, so that's good for them.
All right, let's continue the conversation. We have somebody from the virtual world.
Yep, it's circling back to the earlier discussion, but they asked how important is culture to a company's success, and how do you know when a company's culture needs to change, and what are some of the initial steps you would need to take to change it, and how do you continue to build on a strong company structure and culture?
Wow. I'll take a stab at it, just because I've been with companies that hired consulting firms to come in to build their culture. And I think the first time I went through it, I was like, you can't buy culture. You have to build it. But it was a structure that was put in place that allowed you to have some common language, some common goals. It really, you grounded it on a set of values that everybody kind of stacked hands on and said, yes, that's us, that then supported a mission. And then you needed to make sure that it stayed and it cascaded throughout the organization. And that's the important part of it. You get the common language, but then you need for it to continue, and you may bring senior management through this sort of culture training first, but if you don't bring the whole organization through it, it won't sustain itself. And just to give you an example of that, when I first did it, we went off site, we spent a week, and you worked on certain things. And so I came back, and part of the training was, one of the terms was be here now, which meant, no multitasking, stop what you're doing, focus on your employees when they come into your office. So, I came back from my training, and one of my employees asked what it was about. And I had this little blue chip on my table, and she's like, what was the blue chip for? And I said, well, it's to focus on what's important, and you can't do everything. So work on high priority items that have the most value. And then she's like, what's this be here now? And I was like, okay, you should always just stop what you're doing, give your undivided attention, both home and at work. She's like, okay. So kind of a week goes by. She comes in my office. I'm still plugging away on my computer. My back's to the door. And that little blue chip came whizzing by my ear to remind me, hey, this is what culture is all about. So that's why you gotta cascade it, and you have to, employees have to keep leaders honest about it. When I went to United Healthcare, they hired the same exact consultant to come in to drive culture. Same exact templates, same exact language. But what United did was they carried it through with culture ambassadors, and they brought it, 3-4 year program, spent a lot of money on it. And it really did change the way people treated each other, took a lot of the arrogance out of the company and made it a much more consumer friendly organization. So it really did work, but it's a commitment, and you can't buy it. You got to really build it, but the structure is certainly helpful to have around.
I think a culture can make or break a company, and that's been proven time and time again. I think it's actually one of the most important things. There's some research coming out of MIT about why people do leave companies, and for the most part, it was toxic cultures and where they felt like they didn't have a purpose and they didn't have a culture. So I really appreciate your point of view on you really have to invest in it. There is actually a methodology to it. Believe it or not, there's a science behind it. And it may mean you have to bring in a consultant, but one of the things that I did when I worked at GE was that actually was my job, cultural integration, because we would buy and sell companies. And there is a methodology about how you arrive to it. I think one of the most important things that I would just add to the comments are, I kind of define it as, yes, you can kind of put the culture in place. It's usually through your values and your leadership behaviors. And the most difficult thing is holding people accountable to it. So you kind of do this very simple thing. It's going to sound horrible, but it's basically who you hire and who you fire. And that's how you will know a culture is working, because you infuse it into everything that you're doing. You have behavioral interviews, so you understand who you're bringing into the company. It's part of your performance review process. It's the people that get the money, right? Because performance will sometimes align to the compensation. It's those people that are living your values. So your reward system, your leadership training is aligned to those, developing in those leadership behaviors. It's such difficult work, but that is where many companies just kind of fall apart, or they say like, well, culture is like snacks and like all of this kind of cute stuff that was part of, cultures a few years ago. And that's actually not what it is. I mean, to echo what Jim was saying, it's entrenched into the way that you run the business and the decisions that you make. Who stays there and who doesn't.
Thank you. Other questions? Yeah.
One question I would selfishly have is, well, very senior career, I've obviously worked with different firms at different points. What's a positive experience where you engaged a third party and they delivered a value that you weren't expecting, whether positive impact on culture or did an analysis that you weren't expecting, but it really just delivered a lot of value for your company, or in reverse, something that made you rethink engaging a third party again in that type of space. But just experiences that were positive or lessons learned for you engaging with third parties. Love to hear how we can kind of improve our model to better serve the C-suite.
Ours is a little bit of this, I guess, a small micro example, but we engaged a firm to do some 360 reviews. And this was kind of on the back of COVID. It was geared primarily towards not culture necessarily, but just figuring out like where are our blind spots, right? Both as leaders and organizationally. And what we found to be super helpful was it wasn't just about having, surveys to fill out and like the anonymity of it. It was the fact that this individual traveled to our annual offsite, spent the entire weekend with us, and engaged in conversations. And what I found was it wasn't about, oh, here are the things that we found, because that's kind of passe, and frankly, it's not super helpful. It's more about, hey, I'm also noticing the themes that I picked up on in the surveys in your interactions, right? So you could tell he was engaged, but at the same time, observant of how we interacted together. And that was really helpful, trying to tie it to specific behaviors, even if it's in a social, context. So I think to me, it was contextualizing whatever it is that you're trying to do, because I think there is a tendency for consultants in general to maybe not necessarily have that context. And at that point, it tends to be a little bit of wasted steps.
Yeah, for me, we engage professional service firms for things we think we can't do very well, and so we want another point of view. I've had very good success, probably in the more in the tech space when we're introducing new technology within a finance organization, just because it's hard to wrestle spreadsheets and just bad practices from the finance team or the actuarial or underwriting groups, because they just love their processes and their spreadsheets, and they don't think anybody can do it better. So bringing sort of a third-party voice in really does help, especially if they're viewed as an expert in the industry in that particular field. What's interesting though is maybe my last year at United, we had, right before the pandemic hit, they had contracted with a very well-known, prestigious consulting firm to come in and do some customer segmentation type work. And that was going to be our strategy for how we go to market right before the pandemic hit. And that work came to my desk and I was asked to sort of validate it. And so our team went off and kind of ran a similar analysis and came back that was completely contrary to what the other firm had said, and basically pointed us in a very different direction. And it took a while because they had the reputation of being the experts in the industry. So it took us a while to go in and introduce, well, here's why that is flawed. And then, oh, by the way, it's never going to work now because the world just turned upside down. But it was primarily, they were using a very old model, and they weren't really looking at some of the newer technologies with machine learning and artificial intelligence and clustering algorithms and things like that, that actually, when you pointed it at our data instead of industry data, told a very different story, because our customer base chose us for a reason, and therefore it had a very different outcome. But trying to convince everybody that they were wrong was a major undertaking.
You're going to hear a similar theme from me tonight. So we don't use consultants very much because obviously we don't have a big budget. But if we do, we really have to have a huge return on it. So either increase revenue, dramatically decrease expenses, and we take a risk. So every time I do hire someone, I take a risk in front of my board that it better come out with a positive impact. And we did actually hire someone who could give us access. And so for me, that was access to the representatives of the state of Connecticut or the senators, hoping that I could maybe get some bonding money. And we did this for about 2 years. And she got me into all these meetings with representatives, and happy to say that last December, the state of Connecticut gave us $1 million grant. So that one did pay off, but if it didn't, probably would have been in big trouble.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes.
This one's circling back to what you guys were talking about when it came to what we should be telling our recent grads. So Stefan asks, what professional development recommendations would you give to graduating Golden Bears as they complete the course outside of what you have already provided? So as they're preparing to apply or as they're going into interviews, what should they be looking to do? How should they be approaching?
Yeah, I would say, I guess if you're approaching graduation, this is, I guess, maybe old school, but I think it's timeless. Like, don't be afraid to outreach, find a connection, be able to develop a personal, connection with somebody quickly. And it doesn't have to be transactional. It can be very genuine and authentic. Just show a genuine interest in what you're trying to do. And then if you're preparing for a specific interview, which I think is part of the question, it's really understanding what the job is, right? And it's not just, being able to recite the spec or making sure your resume looks good, but like really think hard about how your own personal skills map to what that role is really asking, right? And not just for that role, although that's fine, but like, what should you be looking for in terms of growth in that role? You know, and think a little bit more critically about the steps you're taking professionally.
I just have one comment. So a lot of these kids coming out, they had helicopter parents, and I might have been one of them, but just to try to do some things on your own too. Like I gave someone an offer not too long ago, just, well, I need to ask my dad. And I thought, oh no, decide on your own.
Yeah, I think one of the questions I always ask is, so in insurance, I just ask, why insurance? Because it's not usually like your career choice, coming out of college. And I'm really looking for what's the passion behind the role? Is it, I just want a job, or is it, no, I really want a career in insurance because it's Hartford, Connecticut, the insurance industry, capital of the world, or just some reason other than it's a job. So I'm looking for that passion. When I was at United, I would always ask why healthcare, and look for that, the connection of, what they want to go into an industry that's really trying to make a difference in people's lives, some things like that. So just a little bit more around what makes them tick and their interest in the role.
Or just say, learn the business. I think some people do interview and they're like, oh, it's like, maybe you've had your resume out there, and that's fine, but just maybe learn a little bit about the business. And maybe to your point, Jim, is I do think it's really important for people to understand the purpose and the culture of companies, because they are very different. And what happens is when you start tracking like how many people, if people leave within their first year of being there, that means that there's either a disconnect with the job or with the culture. So I always recommend with people, like, get to know as much about the company, not only their financials and what they do and their purpose, but also what is it like on a daily basis? Is that something you're going to be excited about? Because we all spend so much time at work, whether we're working from home or in the office, but get to know that culture and what it's like to be part of that team.
Andy, were you going to say something? All right. Other questions? All right, let's take a little bit of a pivot and talk about another topic that's front and center in many organizations, and that is DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And perhaps you can share a little bit about how you, Pam, as a CEO, and other C-suite executives at your organizations have led in this space. It's easy to talk about the value and importance. It's difficult to inculcate or imbue a culture that's genuine in the DEI space. So can you talk about your organizations and your experiences in leading in this area?
Yes, I have to say, when we first started on this journey, we had really lofty goals. So DE&I, we were going to mirror the state of Connecticut diversity with our WISH kids, with our staff, with our board, with our volunteers. And now a few years later, we realized that is just not possible with such a small group and organization. So we've at least come to the point where DEI, we think about across everything we do. But we also, for staff hire, we say, well, at least the candidates will be diverse. In the end, with 19 people, I have to pick someone who's going to do the job very well. But it took a while, because we really felt like we're going to do all this, and it's been harder. Volunteers, I can't find volunteers as much as we try to go to different groups and get volunteers to speak Spanish. Maybe I get a few and then I lose a few. So we're still way behind on that, but we're trying to take the lead and try to do everything we can, but it's we're far behind from where we thought we were going to be.
Anybody else want to take a shot?
Chief People Officer, here we go again. We have kind of the standard employee resource groups, and we have what's called a JEDI Council. It's Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And those are kind of what I would say were foundational with the organization over a couple of years. Actually, our ERG network is pretty significant, because people, again, it's actually a way that you can kind of connect people in a very hybrid and remote, is joining a lot of those organizations really brought people together. What we're doing now, though, so we have kind of an interesting thing, though, right? Because out of 1,800 people, We have almost half of them that sit in Bosnia or Zurich or Australia or Singapore. And diversity looks very different when you're outside of the United States. And so we've tried to think about a couple of things this year. One is I'm just a believer in this personally, is the way that you will drive diversity and inclusion is you embed it into everything that you're doing. Again, it's kind of this, it's this like rinse and repeat that we're talking about, right? Which is, so as part of our recruiting, we do know through research that if you have even two, if you've ever heard the comment, two in a pool. So if your talent pool has even just two diverse individuals, your chances of actually selecting a diverse hire increase. It's actually a Harvard study that was done. If you also add diversity to your assessment, so the people that get around the table and discuss who should we hire, those small little things can increase your diversity. And so we're doing those kind of things around keeping the ERGs for engagement. We're going to explore the global piece of it because that is very important. We want this to be that our Bosnia team in Zurich and Australia really feel a part of something bigger. So we want to expand it this year to include that. We're embedding it into everything that we're doing, the talent practices. So hiring, promotion process, talent review, et cetera. And then the last thing is we actually have a KPI now that we report out to the board. So just to keep us all honest is our KPI is that we want to increase and start small. And we want to increase diversity, manager diversity by 3%. And so that's at least something, right, that holds people accountable for and that we have to report out to the board on. So just a couple of things.
Thank you. Other questions online in the audience? All right, let's talk about another topic at the forefront at many organizations, including in higher education, and that is mental health and mental well-being. And I know all of you have had to deal with this in your personal, professional lives within your organizations. Perhaps you can share with us how your organizations have sought to prioritize mental health and well-being for your employees, your workforce. And perhaps share with us some strategies that you have deployed that you've deemed successful. We're all struggling through this. We're working through it in real time, but it's kind of best practices sharing. So we'd like to hear some of your organization's effective strategies.
Yeah, so I'll start a little bit. I don't know if we classify it as a strategy or not, but it's a little like the diversity conversation. It's becoming more and more prevalent where it's part of the conversation. And it probably stimulated from some tragic events or even going through COVID was certainly a traumatic events. But we've had some unfortunate incidents with either associates or family members of associates and things like that, which kind of put these things in the forefront. Our benefits package has the traditional EAP programs, and it becomes more and more of a selling point. I wouldn't say a selling point, but a talking point. It's an opportunity in open enrollment to say not only it's a comprehensive benefits package, it's a total rewards package, but let's not forget about these things, right? You've got EAP, you've got suicide awareness, you've got other programs, financial stability, financial planning. That all adds to the stress on the employees' lives. And these programs are available. So we take the open enrollment as kind of the kickoff to start that process of having those conversations. Again, we've unfortunately been reminded on certain events where an employee passes away or employee's child unfortunately passes away. And it becomes a reminder that we use those unfortunate events to reinforce that there are programs available, but not only are there programs available, but your 9-to-5 job isn't the most important thing in the world. Your 8-to-8 job with the way we're working today, and we've tried to reinforce that. And I think COVID and the remote work and the flexibility that we've started to embed within our workforce is kind of reinforcing that as well.
Yeah, I guess beyond just creating a culture that's around employee well-being and having a benefit package that offers all that assistance, the broader step is really the management training, so that managers are checking in with employees, because it's easy in the environment today for employees to somewhat get lost because they're working from home and they're just attached, they're chained to a laptop or a PC at home, and they're not getting that interaction. So really kind of training our managers to do those reach outs and to have conversations, not just, hey, we're doing a one-on-one and we're going to go through the to-do list, but really a one-on-one just to find out how you're doing. Look for those indicators of just stress, because even when you're in a work at home environment, like I didn't even realize it until I started working at home, that commute into the office is kind of a de-stressor, and actually you get away from a lot of the drama that's in the household. And when you're working at home, you're dealing with all your work drama, and now you're dealing with all your home drama all at the same time. And it does require you to find some separation. And so if we as managers are feeling that, then obviously our employees are feeling that. So let's make sure we're checking in much more regularly. So management training around that has been a priority, beyond just making sure the benefit package is structured appropriately so all the services are available, but also just making sure that managers are alerted and kind of managing that stress level. And then we do those pulse surveys, or we'll do those employee engagement surveys on a regular basis too. And one of the questions is always around stress level and burnout, to make sure we're identifying that.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'm just going to add one thing too, and I think it starts from the top. So senior leadership should always maybe share some of their struggles, right? We always shouldn't seem like we're just so perfect. And, every once in a while I'll just say, hey guys, I'm taking a mental health day today. And it's okay for you too when you ever need one. And I feel that goes a long way.
Thank you. All right, we're approaching stoppage time. So this is the last call for questions in the live audience. And Brianna, we have one
I have a
online.
couple that are spanning all of our discussions tonight. So I'm gonna start with the closest to our discussion. This one goes back to our diversity conversation. So the question is, oftentimes organizations say they value diversity, but there's a glaring lack of diversity in the C-suite and amongst decision makers. How can diverse candidates highlight their contribution to diversity in a way that does not cause organizations to be put off?
Do we need for her to repeat the question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's part of it.
It's the last part.
Okay, so how can diverse candidates highlight their contribution to diversity in a way that does not cause organizations to be put off by their contributions to, I think, trying to make the organization look good?
Oh, that they're pushing leadership. I'm just trying to.
Yeah, I think they're trying
They're-
to say that there's lacks diversity at higher levels, so if they want to continue moving up, how can they continue to do that without being pushy or seeming that they're going to be put off by it?
I think it perhaps talking to the contradiction, the perceived contradiction that that's what I'm trying.
So that you promote yourself as a very diverse and inclusive company, but it doesn't cascade throughout the organization because it still hasn't made its way to the C-suite, right? Yeah. Which, it reinforces that although there's been a lot of great progress, everybody's still somewhat in their infancy when it comes to diversity and inclusion, and making sure you've got a welcoming environment. And, even for me, I was thinking about this because, I was always a big proponent of its diversity of thought. That's the value of diversity. And, it wasn't until recently that it was, that optic of diversity is just as important. And it's not an optic for optic's sake. It's an optic that makes people feel comfortable. And then it makes them feel welcome because they see themselves in all of the organization. And that's what we need to get to. We're definitely not there yet, but that's what we need to get to. So making sure that we get that optics so that it creates that level of comfort, that people feel welcome and people see diversity at all levels of the organization is important. And that then therefore brings the diversity of life experiences to the table, to the decision-making of the business and the empowerment of the business, as well as then the diversity of thought. So there's a long road to go, but it's great that companies are at least welcoming that dialogue and welcoming that push to make that optic across the C-suite and all levels of the organization.
The only thing I'll add, I don't know if this helps the question though, is where I've seen this done well, it's not at my current company. I mean, we have our own, I do think like as you embed for companies, as they embed it into everything they do, it was at Moody's. And what we did there is we actually said, we wanted to increase our diverse talent, especially Hispanic and Black. And so what we did is we actually, again, working with the board, a lot of this, you just have to work it with this, the team. It has to be kind of driven through from, I think Pam, you mentioned, like a lot of this has to be driven top down. It's just because that's what drives the culture, I think. And but what they did, I actually thought was really great, which was we actually said, we're just going to have a talent review. We're going to understand who's the talent, our diverse talent across the company. And so each of the leaders had to put forth about 5 nominations of people that they wanted to really invest in terms of visibility and development and training, because that then became the feeder pool for some of the senior positions. And so again, it doesn't answer this person's question because they're asking it from as a potential candidate. But again, a lot of it has to be that the company is showing signs that they value this in their culture. And it's not just, we're celebrating Black History Month or whatever, but they're actually part of their processes, who they hire, who they promote, who they're getting exposure to in their leadership development programs or high potential programs, that they're actually making a conscious decision to put diverse talent in there. It's the only way you can do that.
Yeah, and I'll go back to my example with the blue chip. It's important for people to continue to raise the dialogue because again, companies are going to make mistakes. They still need to be held accountable. And even if we think we're doing everything right, we still need to be held accountable, or you can slip back into bad practice. I can give you an example that was in my life where I was coordinating an event, and it was for the deaf community, and it was at the governor's mansion. And I've been involved in the deaf community for a long time. And so we made sure we had access. So made sure we had sign language interpreters. We made sure we had captionists. We made sure that everybody was going to feel welcome and inclusive. And so at the reception table, sign language interpreters, everybody's there. So, we think we know everything. Well, we're wondering it's 7 o'clock and nobody's here yet. Well, in order to get into the governor's mansion, you have to press a buzzer and announce yourself. And we didn't have anybody down there. So there's a big line of cars down the street because we didn't have a sign language interpreter right there to allow people in. So right there, did we make everybody feel welcome and inclusive, right? When they're sitting outside the gate? No. So, and that was a community of people who serve, the deaf and hard of hearing community. So, you need that inclusivity to cover off on everybody's blind spots or unbiased or subconscious or subconscious bias, I guess.
I'm determined to answer this question. I'm gonna give this another shot. My suggestion for this person might be nothing speaks better than speaking the language of the business. And so I think if this person could really have some, get to know the businesses, find out where like the pain points are or the problems to be solved. That's what gets many people ahead, right? Is you're the one that kind of goes in, dives in and really, speak the language of the business, right? Put together a proposal. Here's what I'm thinking. Here, there's I have not seen a leader yet that doesn't want to hear they don't know everything, right? And it's they want to hear new ideas, new thinking that's going to help the business. So I think if you orient it to the business, you got a good shot of probably getting some exposure to say, hey, let's listen here. This might be some interesting work that this person can take on or do.
No, I think that's a good point. I think you can drive it from the bottom up, and you just made me remember an event where we were building a talent pool, and what we wanted to do is create a diverse, higher talent pool coming in. And so we started with local high schools, inner city, that had a way to matriculate into a community college system that could then matriculate into four-year schools and have internship programs all along the way. And I was trying to get funding for it, and it was during a budget cycle where they were cutting budgets, and this program was getting cut, and it wasn't a lot of money, but it was just getting cut. And so I just went back and reinforced, are we a diverse and inclusive company, and do we want a diverse candidate pool coming in? Because this is an easy way to do it, and really got management to rethink it and come back and fund it. So I think you can push it, especially if you put it back in business terms of, you know, let's just walk the talk.
Very good. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, the common thread through the wonderful panel we have here tonight is that they are all alums. They are graduates of Western New England University. In some cases, they're twofers, right? So we're going to do the lightning round here. And I'd like to ask each of you in 30 seconds or less, based on your time at Western New England as an undergrad and/or graduate student, as well as your experience in your career and life, what is the best advice that you have for our Western New England students and alums? 30 seconds or less. We'll begin with Eric.
Yeah, I mean, I think I work in an environment where I'm usually the only person from a non-Ivy school. And so I think a big learning for me was just kill the imposter syndrome. I mean, I think that's a big thing, especially coming from a university not everybody knows. What I would say is that, you know, the education you get here, the experience you get here, the learnings you get here are more than sufficient, you know, and in fact, I find in some cases better. Or have better prepared me in certain instances to just really lean into it. So trust yourself, trust your background, trust the effort, and I think it'll be fun.
Excellent, thank you. Andy?
All great things, and I would add to that something that I think we talked about earlier. You know, you have to be out there, you have to make connections and use those connections and be a connection for somebody else as well. Eric talked about earlier, talking to a mentee, find a mentor. I think that's one of the greatest things that a young student or young professional can find in the workforce or even outside of the workforce. Find those connections, make those connections, and they'll take you just as far as your education will.
Great, thank you.
I would say be proud of who you are. Own it. That's the beauty of the world, right? Is so many unique people, and speak your voice. I've always and I learned a lot of this through my career as well as coming to Western New England, is you're going to get turned down so many different times and people will think you can't do it, but you just have the tenacity and the drive and just pursue, just keep going and make sure you're speaking your voice along the way, because that's important for you. It makes you kind of connect to your values of who you are as a person, and it can lead to greater things.
Thank you. Pam?
And I would just say, out hustle them. Back in the day when you worked 9 to 5, I was never the one who ran out the door at 5. And I tell my daughters today, it's like 9 to 5 for your job, but 5 to 9 for your career. And that's what they're doing today. And hopefully it will serve them well. It served me well.
Excellent, Jim.
And I would echo Andy's comments about making connections, leverage your network, leverage the broader network, truly differentiate yourself, and always just follow your passion, because you're going to spend a lot of time in your job. So make sure it's something you really want to do and it's what you're passionate about.
All right, thank you. It's now my pleasure to re-invite Rob Madrid back up for some closing remarks. But before he does, I'd like to again thank Eric, Andy, Diane, Pam, and Jim for returning to Western New England, your alma mater, to participate in this panel this evening. Thank you very much. How about a big round of applause?
that was a great, excuse me, that was a great discussion. So thank you. So thank you again to our panelists for sharing your passion and your insights with us. I truly hope all of you who joined us this evening, in person and virtually, enjoyed the discussion. The Alumni Association looks forward to bringing you more events and providing unique experiences for our Golden Bear community. Please be sure to stay connected to us through social media, email, and our events. A current calendar of events can be found on our website, alumni.wne.edu. I invite you all to join us for a continued conversation at a reception just outside the room. And for those unable to join us, we hope to see you again soon. So thank you very much.